السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل إدارة الرئيس الأمريكي دونالد ترامب عازمة على حل أكثر الصراعات إلحاحا التي امتد بعضها لعقود من الزمن مثل كوريا الشمالية وغيرها بحسب المصادر، ولكن أين الصين وروسيا وإيران والمنطقة العربية من هذا؟ مع مؤسس ومدير منتدى النزاعات الدبلوماسي الأوروبي ألستر كروك نتحدث عن دينامية المنطقة من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. لم يكد يمضي 100 يوم على وصول دونالد ترامب إلى البيت الأبيض حتى بدأت جهات متنوعة تسعى لاقتلاعه دستوريا. هذا ما فصلته مقالة نيويوركر بعنوان كيف يمكن لترامب أن يطرد، حيث يتحدث الكاتب عن مسارين دستوريين أساسيين لإزاحة ترامب عن الرئاسة. منتقدو ترامب يعملون بجد على استكشاف الطريق إلى اتهامه أو اللجوء إلى التعديل الخامس والعشرين من الدستور الأمريكي الذي يسمح بتبديل الرئيس الذي يعد غير صالح عقليا للحكم. فبحسب المراقبين ترامب يختلف عن الرؤساء السابقين بطرق تزيد من مخاطره السياسية والقانونية والشخصية، فهو أول رئيس لا يتمتع بخبرة مسبقة في الحكم أو العسكر، وهو أول من يبقي على ملكية إمبراطورية تجارية، وهو الأكبر سنا في الوصول إلى البيت الأبيض بين أسلافه. أما حلفاء ترامب فيرون في نسبة 40% من الاستحسان الشعبي بحسب تقديرات جولت أمرا يقض مضاجعهم، إذ لا يمكن لرئيس أن يحكم أميركا بهذه النسبة المتدنية والمقلقة. وحتى قبل تربع ترامب على عرش البيت الأبيض قام مكتب التحقيقات الفيدرالية و4 لجان من الكونغرس بالتحقيق في تواطؤ محتمل بين فريق ترامب والحكومة الروسية. وبين أكتوبر تشرين الأول وآذار مارس استلم مكتب الولايات المتحدة للأخلاقيات الحكومية أكثر من 39,000 من الاستفسارات العامة والشكاوى، أي بزيادة قدرها 5,000% خلال الفترة نفسها في بداية إدارة أوباما. ألستر كروك الدبلوماسي السابق في الاتحاد الأوروبي ومؤسس ومدير منتدى النزاعات، كيف يقرأ الاتفاق على مناطق خفض التصعيد في سوريا؟ وماذا حل اليوم بشعار دونالد ترامب أميركا أولا؟ وما رأي النخب الأمريكية بسيد البيت الأبيض؟ Alistair Crook, former EU diplomat, founder and director of Conflicts Forum. Welcome to الداخل from the inside, sir. Always welcome, Alistair.
Thank you so much for inviting me back again. Pleasure.
Always welcome, sir. Well, Alistair, you've been on a tour in the region, and which you have just wrapped up, and matters and the state of affairs seem not to simmer down where you have been. Can you tell us a bit about the situation, what you have seen, what you have heard?
I think the situation, I spent about 5 or 6 days in Iraq and visited the shrines of Karbala, Najaf, Kufa, and saw the people there. I think that something important is happening. I found that every day there were martyrs coming back to the holy shrines and coming out. One day maybe 2, next day 1, but all the time.
From the battle in Mosul?
From Mosul. And I went to see the people, the displaced people from Mosul, who are refugees near Karbala that the shrines care for. And they tell horrifying stories. Horrifying stories. There was one little girl, 7 years old, just didn't speak, just fiddled with her hands all the time, twisting. She'd seen her father and her brother killed by Daesh in front of her. She's so traumatized. It's really sad to see this young girl of 7. She never speaks, she just stays like a robot with a little frown on her head, waiting for her daddy to come back. Of course, he is never going to come back. But many of those people have gone to join the mobilization forces, the Hashad, from there.
Yes.
And there is a mobilization taking place across the region to fight Takfiris and Daesh in Mosul and elsewhere. And then they want to go back to their lands. There's a great fear, as they expressed to me. They don't want to end up like Palestinians, forever refugees. They want to go back. And
when it's all over, they want to go back to their own land.
They want to go back soon to their own lands. So, but the situation in Iraq is very complicated. You know better than I, but it's very complicated with the Americans, with the relations with the outside, and I could see a lot of tension within the Iraqi people about what is the right direction in which to move. Some want to, if you like, assert a very independent Iraq. Others want to be closer to, not to exclude America. Others want to be closer to Iran and Syria. So it's not very easy to see what the future is going to be. But what I think is quite clear, and in a way the next stage has been set, I think not deliberately by President Trump, but almost inadvertently. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, married to his daughter Ivanka, wants to do a peace process. Wants to do a peace process which...
This is a neocon approach.
It's a neocon. It's not even a neocon, it's an old idea that you get the outside ring. It's called the outside-inside, that you do a deal with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, and then they impose it on the weak Palestinians. That's essentially it. But for that, now we see America aligning itself closer to Saudi Arabia. Jared Kushner has strong links with Netanyahu. Netanyahu used to stay in his father's apartment when he visited New York. And in fact, Jared Kushner used to give up his bedroom to Netanyahu when he stayed there. So there are strong links there, and we see that President Trump is now going to Saudi Arabia. He's already received Mohammed bin Salman in Washington. And I think that this is going to define the next period. Whatever else, it's not a strategy. I don't think this constitutes a Middle Eastern strategy, foreign policy strategy. It sort of happened by default. But now that he's aligned himself with Saudi Arabia as a prime interest and the Gulf states, of course, those states are going to lever that alliance in a way to demonize Iran and also likely to heat up the situation in Iraq and in Syria in order to further impede Iranian influence in the region. So I think we'll see as a consequence of it heightened language against Iran. We've already heard that from Mohammed bin Salman, very strong language saying it's impossible to talk to Iran under any circumstances. And I think the aim is to heighten antipathy towards Iran in Washington. The problem here, and why I think it's so dangerous for this region, for Iraq and for Syria, is that the generals that surround Trump, many of those generals were in Iraq after 2003. And for whatever reason, whether they chose to blame for their own failures or whatever, they have come to see all of the problems of Iraq as caused by the Iraqi Shia militia who are puppets of Iran, and that Iran is behind everything bad in the region. Everything is the responsibility. You talk about General Mattis. Flynn was the same before he left office. You talk about McMaster. He's more anti-Russian than just anti-Iranian.
He's a Russophobe.
But he's a strong Russophobe. But I think that this demonization of Iran is going to cause... Because how do we have a solution in Mosul where no one has an answer for what happens in the day after the defeat of Daesh in Mosul.
In this sense, Alistair, observers note that today we have a new battle in Syria. Russia, Turkey, Iran, Damascus, de-escalation zones, and versus USA, Saudi Arabia, Israel, safe zones. How do you read this, and is there a danger of partitioning Syria?
The intention of Russia is exactly the opposite, and Iran, is to keep Syria intact and whole. Clearly, there are tensions within this group because I'm not sure that those ideals are held by Turkey in the same way. I think that there was discussion at Astana. This was to be discussed this week, and I don't know the outcome, about widening the Astana talks to include Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and even Egypt, although I think Turkey was opposed to Egypt's involvement in the process. However, even so, I think the aim of this 4 areas of de-escalation is really, first of all, to separate out those areas, but also, if you like, to try and bring down the level of violence to enable the political talks to move ahead. But as I say, one of the key factors that I think will shape this is the very closeness of the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Washington. And as you saw, Mohammed Salman's younger brother has been appointed ambassador in Washington so that he can talk directly
to Trump.
To Trump. So I think that the more the Americans align themselves with the Gulf, the more the Americans see the world. Ibn al-Arabiya used to talk about you have to see with 2 eyes. But at the moment, Iraq and Syria are seen with 1 eye, only through the eye of the Gulf perspective on the world. And that is something those generals have inherited from their time in Iraq after 2003 and from their relationship with the Gulf world, their close military relationship with the Gulf and with Saudi Arabia. They see the world through only one perspective, a particular perspective. It's not, I'm not suggesting that perspective is not authentic. It's authentic of the Gulf states, but it's only one perspective. There is another very different perspective by which to look at the world.
Right, Alistair, allow us to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to talk a bit more about Donald Trump's America First doctrine and what happened to such a doctrine today, but after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهب بعيدا.
في خلال 120 ساعة أي ما يعادل 5 أيام انتقل الرئيس الأمريكي دونالد ترامب بانعطافة مفاجئة من تصريح يمكن للأسد أن يبقى إلى شن 59 صاروخ توماهوك على سوريا. واشنطن قالت قولها وتحملت أمريكا مسؤوليتها في التحدي وتقديم التفسيرات للواقع مجددا بحسب المتابعين. ألستر كروك الدبلوماسي السابق في الاتحاد الأوروبي ومؤسس ومدير منتدى النزاعات يشرح أين أصبح شعار أميركا أولا، الأمر الذي صوتت على أساسه القاعدة الانتخابية للسيد ترامب.
This is a subject that the base that voted Mr. Trump into office wants to know and answer. They are very perplexed. But your viewers have to understand there's a real war going on, both within America. This is not just a war within America. It is a war between the Midwest, the so-called deplorables, the people who live in the rural center of America, and the cosmopolitan globalist elites who live along the coastal areas of America, the California, the New York, the Washington, the elites who are very rich, who've become quite rigid, who are not really open to criticism, who have become really too brittle to change with events, but now are being challenged really challenged from inside. I was in Washington just a couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so ago, and I asked people, the elites, some of the elites, I was there at a meeting and I asked them, what is it that worries you? What is bothering you about Mr. Trump? One of them just held his hands and he said, this man, he's just driving me nuts. I'm going crazy. I'm absolutely going mad. He comes at me from this direction, that direction, and I'm going quite crazy. Another one, when I said the same question, what's going on? And he said, look, Alistair, those people are not Daesh, they're their own countrymen in Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio. Those people, they don't have pitchforks. They're coming for us with submachine guns. Another person said, oh, those people, they're coming to dismantle us. They want to take us down. They've launched this loathing that has been quiescent in America for a long time. It's very bitter, and the fighting is taking place within it, and the base wonders exactly why Trump is not sticking to America first. Half of them are beginning to think that he has been normalized by the deep state, by the environment, that he's been captured, that the military are out of control and are wanting to have wars here and there with Iran and North Korea, and they wonder if Trump is no longer in control. Some estimate that maybe 60% of the base are really quite anxious about whether Trump is that. The other 40, 50%, there's no reliable statistics of this, are saying, no, Trump is still, he's the real thing. He is going to drain the swamp. He is going to change direction.
And he's going to settle perhaps the unsettled conflicts that the Americans have long aspired to settle.
Some of those want to believe that, but there is a huge shift taking place in the base. And don't forget, if the tenure of Trump over the Congress and the Senate is quite small, and if he loses the elections next year...
Maybe that's why he resorted to such kind of moves in Syria and in Afghanistan.
It's clear. I mean, let us be clear what I think was happening in what happened in Syria. I think it was actually an emotional reaction that came with this. And he emoted quite a lot for 2 days afterwards. This terrible, I've never seen things like this. He hasn't, of course, like I was last week, seeing and talking to the refugees who've just fled Mosul. But I think after that, then the idea struck him, well, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea because it would turn the whole narrative, and no one could say that he was Putin's Manchurian agent any longer. His message to Putin was very harsh and clear-cut, that either Assad is your ally, or but that didn't come from him. I think it was very clear. You saw the picture of the National Security Council taking the decision. Not one single intelligence agency was
the
present.
DIA or the CIA, they were not present.
Because many of them know that it was not Assad. They had the information. It was passed by the Russians.
They said
beforehand.
that Assad is inculpable.
It was not there. So he excluded the intelligence service and had one person who's not an intelligence professional, McMaster, the National Security Advisor, there. And McMaster is deeply Russophobe.
Sure.
And he used it. I think Trump had wanted to send a tweet saying, don't do this, I can see you, I'm tough, I'm not going to be like Obama and be weak and do this. But it was meant to be a gesture. I think McMaster weaponized that meeting and turned it into an ultimatum to Russia, saying, you're either with us, the West, or you're with Assad. You choose. And that was extremely dangerous. And we heard from Medvedev the reaction.
Allow me in this sense, Alistair, to read here something, vis-a-vis the Trump military foray. Russian Prime Minister Medvedev's comments were unparalleled. He declared that U.S.-Russian relations had been ruined, a statement that Professor Cohen, who had 40 years of experience of Russia watching, does not recall any previous Soviet or post-Soviet leader ever have made. Medvedev added that the two nuclear superpowers are at the brink of war. Considering that Medvedev is in the circle, is regarded as the leading pro-Western figure in Putin's inner circle, imagine what the other inside, which is the Russian patriots or the nationalists as they are called, is telling Putin. Are we lurching here to a situation which is similar to that of the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962?
The next thing I have to say is that there are those within the Trump circle who are very concerned about that. The base, the people who represent the base, who speak for it. People like Roger Stone and other people who put together the coalition that brought Trump to power. Many of them are very concerned about this and are trying to pull him back. Now, Trump, I think, in a way, was trying to just change the narrative. America has been feeling weak and is feeling weak, and he wanted, partly because he's claims to be the sort of businessman negotiator. He was a businessman negotiator, and a negotiator likes to negotiate from a position of strength. So he was, I think, trying to change the narrative to give America not a position of coming to Russia or any of the other problem areas from a position of weakness, but one of strength. And I think that in doing that, this made a lot of sense if he was dealing with Japan over paying money for defense or telling Germany it had to pay several $100 billion for their defense. But North Korea is a different case. This is a much harder one. And I think that he can find himself cornered into a binary position where either he goes to war or he has to climb down. And I think this is concerning.
And China and Russia, when it comes to North Korea, they won't just stand there and watch, because Russia has a land and sea boundaries with
exactly
North
Russia
Korea.
As well as China
and China too.
And I think that what is the case is that these people hope and are talking to Trump and saying, the purpose of seeming strong. Actually, you wanted to make peace, wanted to have détente with Russia. You will need to have Iran. We don't have to be allies with Iran, but you don't need a war with Iran. America doesn't want a war with Iran, and we need Iran not to be unhelpful in the region, at the minimum, and maybe perhaps even helpful, as it has been in Syria. So I think, that we shouldn't write off the situation.
Right. Alasdair Crooke, former EU diplomat, founder and director of Conflicts Forum. Many thanks indeed for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Always welcome, sir. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك. من الداخل، من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.